How did I get interested in words and writing? My God, I guess it's called I fell into it. I love to read. I learned to read when I was 3 years old, courtesy of my big sister. And books became one of my best friends. So on many levels, I guess it's no surprise I ended up in publishing, even though it's not like I planned it. Who inspired me? I would really have to say writers, reading people like James Baldwin, and reading people like Maya Angelou, and reading, oh my God, so many people, Jane Austen. And the one thing I'm always saying to students, even though I think they think sometimes I'm a little dotty, is that the more you read, the better you write. And I think that was very much true for me, but I'm also one of those people will tell you it was trash flash, and do you know what I mean, bodice rippers, and you name it. I was just one of those people, I was like reading all the time. Under the covers, after lights out with the flashlight, reading. They were my mentors. When did I know I loved editing and that I could be good at it? I started out in this business after college at Time Incorporated as a researcher back in the mid-'60s when women were never editors. And I remember, you'd write up copy as a researcher to pass on to the writers who were men and the editors who were men. And my copy was never changed, but I didn't think about that. And then I remember there was a thing, they did things called marginalia. I worked in the books division. And there was a photograph of the aftermath of what has been wrongly described as the Battle of Wounded Knee. And when I was writing up the caption, I wrote it up as Massacre at Wounded Knee. And a couple of days later, this editor, one of my least favorite editors, came back to where I was sitting screaming, red-faced, apoplectic. How dare you, he said. How dare you? And I'm like, okay, fine. So you're the editor. You don't like it, change it. I mean, but it was a massacre. And I learned two things. That at Time Inc., even though researchers are paid zip, we had the power that they couldn't make changes unless we changed it. But I also learned something else. That if a horse's ass like him could be an editor, then for damn sure I could be an editor. And that was my first aha moment, quite frankly. And then I worked on a Black history book with a man who was quite wonderful and who really gave me the opportunity to do a lot of editing. And I discovered I like it. Editing is great logic, as you know. But it also is, if you love words and if you love making sense of things, then editing's a wonderful thing. So again, it was something I fell into and discovered I had an ability for. And I've been ever grateful. I was 26 years old when I got to be the editor-in-chief of Essence magazine. You know that old saying, be careful what you ask for, you might get it? I was at a great age in the sense that I didn't even know what I was asking for, except that I had this absolute belief that I knew exactly what the readers of that magazine were looking for, and that I somehow knew how to deliver it, though I really didn't. Being a 26-year-old plopped into the role of being an editor-in-chief was that I didn't really know any better, and therefore I didn't know any worse. And I didn't really have a lot to lose, because I did not have a reputation. I was basically an unknown entity. And I remember something that my grandmother told me, which stuck in my head even when I would sit up at night going, what are you doing, what are you doing? And she used to always tell me, you really can't fall off the ground. You have to be willing to take risks. And at 26, I was willing to take risks because I really did have nothing to lose. The worst part was I was 26, and I thought, and on many levels, I didn't know that I still had a lot to lose and that I still had a lot to learn. The lucky thing was that because Essence was so unique in that there were so few Black publications at that time, and Black women in particular, had barely gained even close to a toehold in publishing. And so, we were all making our mistakes together. And that was pretty cool. And we made some doozies, I know, but somehow or the other, it all worked out. Essence started in 1970. I became the editor-in-chief in 1971. It was a floundering publication. Black women were ignored. We were supposed to be supporting our men in the movement, but it wasn't about us. And so yes, it was that, my agenda always was, that we were going to be celebrating mind, body, and spirit of Black women. Things that had not been celebrated, not really celebrated in this country ever. Yes, Ebony did some of it. Yes, they were, but not on a monthly basis in a publication dedicated to Black women that said we were smart and that we were beautiful and we didn't have to look like white women to be any of those things. And we could write, and we had minds, and we had spirits, and I wanted all of that in the magazine. And fortunately, so did the people who came to us and published and bought it. I grew up in a family where my parents were activists. I helped organize one of the first major suits in the state of New York about segregated education. I grew up at a time when the civil rights movement was there. So being on picket lines with my sister, raising money for the South, sending shoes down during the Montgomery boycott, collecting shoes, was all part of who I am. I've been really blessed in that I have been able to, I want to call it, sing the song and live it in terms of the work that I've done as a magazine editor. I was able to advance as best I knew how what I thought were the issues and interests of African American women in terms of justice and gender justice and racial justice. And then I was blessed again to be able to do the same thing and more at Ms. Magazine in terms of women across the racial spectrum and across the geographics that could, speak about who we are and what we deserve in this world. So I've always felt that, I've been a really lucky so-and-so. For me to be able to work at something and be part of something that gave me joy and sustenance in a spiritual level, as well as could put the bread on the table and keep a, roof over my head. That's pretty fantastic. It's pretty fantastic. Amen, this idea that America's changed, because we have a Black president. But when we look around in the world, especially in the world of publishing, when we look at books and we look at magazines and who's doing what, one of the things that we see is that the world hasn't really changed that much. For example, like the lack of diversity, if you walk down the halls of most book publishing companies, is still as significant and stunning as it was back in my day. America does this peculiar dance about equality and justice. While, the polls will say, when you ask most people, yeah, they want it. But if it comes down to, but who do you hire? Do you make a conscious effort to reach out? That's not the same thing. For a brief moment, back in the 60s and the 70s, because the pressure was on, there was more effort to reach out. But unless there is pressure, consistent, ongoing pressure, people fall back into old habits. They do what's comfortable, not what is necessarily right or just. And so what we see in so many places is that people who can give you the best conversation about, how much they care, don't know how to put what they care about into practice. And when I look at publications, I kind of shake my head in dismay. I shake my head in dismay because what you see is this Barbie doll cut out sense about even what women should look like. There was this period, back in the day in the 70s, where women's magazines were really kicking it. where you got real substance and great fiction and really great writing and gutsy writing. I think that the important thing is for, girls right now, organizations like Girls Right Now, who are working with young women, is, to talk about how we keep stoking the fire. How we stoke the fire by, there's something really important about righteous rage. It is important that we don't let our young women become complacent. It is important that organizations like Girls Right Now not just talk about writing, but talk about the way in which writing can change worlds. And talk about writing that's uppity. And talk about writing that upsets the status quo and makes people angry and makes them think. So that we don't just end up having nice writing, because that's not the way change happens. And I also well know, it doesn't mean that we're all going to do it all, or that every person is going to do it the same way, or that we're all going to be doing it at the same time. But organizations like Girls Right Now, it's not just to encourage girls to write, it's to encourage them to think independently. It starts out when people say to you, when you're this high and they keep saying it to you as a girl, you are somebody. You deserve anything and everything you can get. Don't take less. So it depends on all of us to be there for them, whether they're ours or somebody else's. Because you just never know what word somebody says can make all the difference.